Let me take you back to 2006, the end of possibly the greatest generation for video games. 3D graphics hardware was exponentially more powerful than the previous generation, unlocking a seemingly infinite wealth of buried potential. All three of the major big boys just spent an entire generation pelting incredible games at us like an automatic ball launcher, one incredible genre-defining title after another, just full steam ahead. One of the most exciting times to be a gamer, and then the next generation starts and they go, okay, now what? How about we do this HD graphics thing, we charge $599 US and motion controls? Record scratch. Everybody gasps. Will Smith says titular one-liner. Sir Duke by Stevie Wonder starts playing in the background. Motion control. It's the future. That was the big thing when it came to the Wii. The motion controls were treated as some kind of fundamental paradigm shift in what video games were, until everyone decided that it was stupid and unnecessary. Now for my money, motion controls never mattered at all. All I wanted was to play those old N64 games that we didn't have anymore. My family lived in a tiny house at the time, so the old consoles had to go to make room for human beings to live in. Back then, my brother had a subscription to a mystical scroll called Nintendo Power, and using this ethereal scripture, he was able to obtain top-secret knowledge of the upcoming Nintendo Revolution. Something he said about it sold me immediately. He said that it could play games from every Nintendo console ever made previously. I thought he was lying to me, but it was true. I pictured a cumbersome monstrosity with 8 different cartridge slots and 32 controller ports, so basically the TriStar 64. In reality, you connected the Revolution to the interweb and downloaded the games to your console and played them. They called it the Virtual Console, which is a fancy way of saying emulator. Using Wii points, which could be purchased with Wii Points cards, you could buy these digital games from the storefront and play them whenever you wanted. If you have a Switch Online subscription, it's kinda similar, except you actually get to keep and own individual games instead of paying an annual fee to hold on to them. Eventually, everything is going to be a fucking subscription service. When there were just 1 or 2 services and most of what you wanted was on there, it was great. Nowadays, everything is so fragmented that you have to subscribe to 18 different services and basically have a long-term DOT stat on your bank account just to be able to consume what is realistically a selective handful of media. How many of you have actually tried to watch literally everything on Netflix? None of you, but you're still paying for it all, so rip. For some people, there are good deals out there like Game Pass, everyone seems to like that. For me though, I'd rather just pay for my own stuff and own it permanently instead of spending my life in a perpetual rental agreement just to be able to play Yoshi's Cookie on NES. I realize that even a digital purchase as opposed to a subscription doesn't guarantee that you can't lose access. In fact, that specific example of Yoshi's Cookie is one of the only games I was not able to reacquire from the Virtual Console. But all I know is that Netflix Canada removed the Boondocks and FMA Brotherhood, but is still charging the same amount of money as if 6 seasons of Big Mouth is remotely equivalent to either of those things. In theory, it's probably not impossible for Nintendo to do something similar with their own services. Imagine losing access to Super Mario Bros. 1 for some reason. The number of times Nintendo has sold and resold SMB, this stupid ass game should come free with every Nintendo console, like Uno. This is actually one of the things I love about the Virtual Console. I bought a shitload of games for this thing back in the day, but had to uninstall them over the years for various reasons. I was afraid that with the service discontinued, I wouldn't be allowed to get them again, but surprisingly, I was able to just hop on and re-download them no problem. Except Yoshi's Cookie. After all these years, these official ROMs that I paid money for are as beautiful as the day that I lost them. Even just watching the games download is a lot of fun. You get this animation of Mario running through a bunch of coins and hitting blocks, and then when it's almost finished, he starts going to town on the last one. Typically, watching something download has the same entertainment value of watching glue dry, so it was neat that they were able to make it fun to watch. If you were lucky, you'd even get Fire Mario and you could tap A to throw a fireball while you wait, and I discovered another one where Mario and Luigi swim through the air, which I had no idea existed before now. Virtual Console is a perfect example of, if it's not broken, don't fix it. And no, it's not perfect either, but it did what it was supposed to. Subscription services wouldn't bother me at all if things like this were still an option. I remember how exciting the Virtual Console was when I first started using it. I must have been like 10 years old, and my mom would drive me to EB Games once in a blue moon, and I would only be buying two things: a Wii Points card and another Wii Points card. I'd bring them home, I'd get on the Wii Shop channel, and then I waited. And waited. And fuck. Okay, test the connection. Round 2, and... Typically, I had at least one game in mind when I bought these things, but if I had a lot of money left over, I might gamble on something I'd never heard of before. Games like Gradius and Wario's Woods I only discovered because I happened to have Wii points left over. The games did not exist in a physical space, but on a digital virtual plane of existence known as the Wii's very small 512 megabyte internal storage. I didn't even know game consoles could just store games directly on the machine. Downloading? Come on, that's for computers. It was one of the first times I remember learning about wireless internet. Wi-Fi? MAC address? SSID? WPA2 Enterprise? What the hell is all that? It was the future, which is ironic because the whole point was to revisit the past. The storefront listed several consoles, each with their own catalog of games to choose from. I never even heard of Neo Geo or TurboGrafx before, so it was pretty eye-opening. They even had stuff for the Commodore 64 by the end. No joke. Typically, there weren't a lot of fundamental improvements to the games, but they got a nice resolution bump, and N64 games definitely benefited from 640 by 480 resolution. Also, there was supposedly a feature in Pokemon Snap where you could send the photos to the Wii message board, I guess as a substitute for the Blockbuster printer function they had back in the day. Although the Virtual Console existed for the later 3DS and Wii U, the Wii was the VC at its best. Because in North America, the Wii's Virtual Console would go on to get 427 games by the end of its lifespan, making it bigger than both of them. Depending on which consoles you were buying games for, they would cost a different amount of money. NES games would usually run you 500 Wii points, SNES would be 800, and N64 would be 1000. Roughly, the real-world equivalent was 100 points to $1, so an N64 game was $10. And while $10 might not sound like an amazing deal for 25-year-old games, buying a copy of Ocarina of Time on eBay could be like $35 by a conservative estimate, so you could do a lot worse than 10. Not to mention, when Neo Geo first came out, it cost $649 US, which might sound really bad until you adjust for inflation and start smelling burnt toast. Oh yeah, and the games? The games were $200 each, which is like $455 today. One Neo Geo video game costs more than a PlayStation 5. So when these games started showing up on the Virtual Console for like $9 a pop a decade and a half later, somebody was definitely kicking themselves. They could have spent that money treating the stroke they had looking at the price of the console. One thing that was pretty wacky ass was the imported titles. A small number of games that didn't come out in North America initially got a second wind on the VC, like Sin and Punishment, which is apparently a really good rail shooter for the N64, and the real Super Mario Bros. 2, which makes me want to stick my skull into a hydraulic press. It might have been nice to see Mother 1 or Final Fantasy 2, 3, and 5, but hey, Sin and Punishment is pretty good. But what was frustrating about the VC is the same thing that makes the Switch Online service frustrating, and that was the game offerings themselves. Even though they had a lot of the games that you would expect, and they had a lot more games than either the Wii U or 3DS Virtual Console did, there were a number of seemingly obvious things that were missing. Things like Earthbound or the Mystical Ninja games on N64 would have been a nice addition, not to mention they had Bomberman Hero, but not Bomberman 64, which I used to hear people say was the best Bomberman ever. Some games took an eternity to come to the service, which I always thought was kinda stupid, and after doing some research on what happened to Rare at the time, I realized some of the games like Banjo-Kazooie, Tooie, and Diddy Kong Racing probably weren't going to come out at all. The only game I figured might come to VC was Donkey Kong 64 because they had Donkey Kong Country already. But by the time that eventually happened, I already gave up waiting and emulated it on the family PC and installed a couple of really cool bonus viruses on the side. For me, learning about emulation was when the Virtual Console started to fall apart. It wasn't so much an issue of money. I mean, yeah, I was a kid, but like, I would pay for a game if I wanted it or I'd ask for my birthday. It was more so that emulation just let me play stuff right now with a lot more functionality, and VC let me play stuff in maybe like a year, except there's no way of knowing for sure if the wait will pay off. Official solutions are easier to handle since it's all pre-configured and you don't have to edit anything, but only if they actually provide the game in the first place, and a lot of the time they just didn't. Handheld consoles were also a notable omission, which was a bit of a missed opportunity. I would have loved to play Mario Land 2 on the big screen back then. One thing that was pretty lame was when they had NES ports of arcade games, but not the original superior versions. I understand that the Wii is not a powerhouse, but I mean, it can run an arcade game from 1981. They did have an arcade game section, so this was a weird move in my book. I mean, really, who wants to be the #1 world champion in the NES version of Pac-Man? According to Wikipedia, they had 7 different Street Fighter 2s on the service, and they expect me to believe they couldn't put more than one version of Mario Bros. Arcade, which is a video game that they literally made themselves with their own hands? It's pretty wild to me that they were charging $5 for the NES version of Donkey Kong, which is missing an entire level, on the same storefront where they were selling DK64, which contains a fully playable version of the original Donkey Kong. So, they were selling a game for half the price of another game they were also selling, which contains a better version of said game. It's like if you could walk into Best Buy and there was a copy of Standard Smash Ultimate for $30 next to a $60 Breath of the Wild that comes with a free copy of Smash Ultimate that has both fighter passes pre-installed. It's just a weird thing. Another thing that pissed me off was that they didn't include memory card or rumble functionality for N64 games. You might call it a nitpick, but I really don't think this was beyond their capabilities. If Project 64 can do it, then there really is no excuse in my book. Switch Online has the same problem. So, no, the Virtual Console wasn't perfect, but it was a great thing that served its purpose dutifully. It was a victory for legacy content, at least for the games that actually did end up on the service. It was affordable, it was functional, it was convenient, and best of all, you didn't have to keep paying for it for years. Nintendo seems to be treating this as more of an obsolete model for legacy content, which is a little sad. But I will say this though, it never got Banjo-Kazooie.